This is a good video on how not to install our rat-proof chicken feeder and how not to train the birds to use the feeder. I really appreciate this guy posting the video, but what it shows is what happens when people don't follow the directions. He added a wider treadle step because he had a smaller bird in the pen, and that's okay, but it removes some of the rat-proof abilities as the rats, wild birds, and squirrels can reach the feed if enough of them get on the treadle. If you do this, trim the board down a bit each week until you're back to the original treadle step size and let the small birds eat when the other birds eat. The real problems, though, are not fastening the feeder securely to a wall or post, not installing the door spring, blocking the treadle open while training the flock, and using too small of a plywood piece for the bottom if he's going to mount the feeder that way. The feeder has a rough 2x4 block included, and that block should be screwed to a wall or post. Then the feeder has a recessed back that sits over this block, and a couple of screws go through the side of the feeder into that wooden block. It does several important things. It prevents the feeder from wobbling around when they use the feeder, and it absorbs some of the shock and vibration when the door closes. That prevents too much feed from being jarred down into the feed tray. The birds can sense when something is stable enough to stand on, so the feeder really needs to be securely fastened to the wall. If you use a plywood base, just screw the wooden block to the plywood and set the feeder over the block and run screws through the side of the feeder. But that plywood needs to be either pretty large or it needs to be solidly secured to some wood stakes driven into the ground. The next problem is that the door spring isn't installed to preload the door. That makes the door stay tightly closed, prevents rats, mice, squirrels, and wild birds from just pushing the door open. It also overcomes any twist in the door and gives a fairly tight seal at the bottom. We do recommend that you adjust the spring tension by carefully stretching the spring until it fits the average weight of your flock. Use 2 pair of pliers and stretch just a small amount. Retest these tensions so that you don't go too far. If you do go too far, put a kink in the straight section of wire or rebend the end to effectively shorten the spring to increase the tension. Yeah, the door is loud, but once they figure it out, that won't bother the birds and you'll be able to hear the feeder operating and know that everything is fine in the chicken house. But the worst mistake in the video was blocking the feeder open while training the birds. When you do that, it teaches the birds that the treadle isn't supposed to move when they step on it. Other manufacturers do recommend blocking the door open because the door swings up into their face, or the birds have to crouch down and reach way inside to reach the feed. Note in the video that the guy unblocks the feeder and the birds are searching for the feed, but they haven't learned how to step on the treadle to get to the feed. They think the feed is unavailable and they're frustrated. Training is so simple if you actually follow our directions. Have the feeder well secured so it doesn't rock around, and fill it with feed the night before you intend to train the birds. Be sure that all the feed is gone, including the free range or treats. Wait till about 3 hours after sunrise the next day. Go inside the coop or use a stick to depress the treadle so the birds can see the feed. One of the birds will step up on the treadle if they're hungry enough to be motivated. Let them eat for a few seconds, then gently nudge them off the treadle and allow them to try again. If they don't step up to try again, they're not hungry enough yet to train. Come back in an hour and repeat the training. If you do this, 99% of the flocks will have at least one bird learn to use the feeder within a few hours, and that bird will quickly train the other birds to use the feeder. Refer to the troubleshooting section of our manual that we send with the feeder, or you can find it posted on the shopping cart where you bought the feeder. If you have any other questions, be sure and email al@thecarpentershop.net, and we'll resend the manual to you. You can find this chicken feeder by Googling rat-proof chicken feeder, or just go to thecarpentershop.net and look for the picture of the chicken feeder and click on it. When you Google the rat-proof chicken feeder, will be one of the top organic searches, as we're pretty much own the Google listing. The organic one anyway. We don't buy ads off of them. Thank you very much for looking at our feeder.